I'm like a little fetus. I'm in my mother's womb, and it all happened very quickly. And then it's like my mom in her mother's womb, my grandmother in her mother's womb, and then all of a sudden feeling all of the emotions of my great grandmother and getting like all these like images all at once of like what was causing all of those emotions for her.
Hola, welcome back to First Gen Healing, a podcast on Latinx healing and awakening journeys. My name is Priscila Luna. I'm the host.
And I'm Maritza Plasencia, and I'm the guest. First of all, I'm a therapist. I specialize working with people dealing with relationship issues stemming from trauma. I consider myself a holistic therapist, meaning that I look at all parts of the person, of the couple, of it's not just the emotions, it's not just a relationship, it's spirituality, it's their community, their family of origin, um, everything and anything that you can possibly think of, we talk about in the sessions. Nothing is off limits, because
Mm-hmm.
I fully believe that it's important to look at ourselves in a holistic way whenever it comes to us having clarity about how to move through life. And
Mm-hmm.
besides being a therapist, I'm the oldest daughter of 5 children.
Ooh.
First gen. My parents are from Mexico. My father's from Jalisco. My mother's from Chihuahua. And I was born and raised in Los Angeles and always have been in California. I have a little doggy and I've been married for 21 years. Can't believe I'm saying that.
Mm.
I got
Wow.
married at 21. So I've been with my husband half my life. One of the things I think that's important to share is that I've been on my healing journey since I was the age of 19, I want to say 18, 19, when I was in college.
Mm-hmm.
Was the first time that I went to therapy. And after on and off therapy, which led me to become a therapist, um, for many years, I discovered sacred plant medicine, specifically Yahe in Colombia, which is known to many people as ayahuasca, and Los Niños Santos, which many people know as sacred mushrooms, and here I am.
How long ago did you start your plant medicine journey or experience?
It was 2023, the very first
Okay.
time that I went. So it's been a little bit of over 2 years.
Okay. I ask because I think it's interesting you mentioned like you started your journey when you were 19. So in the context of it being some time ago, then I'm interested and excited to then hear, like how that experience of healing shifted as plant medicine came into the picture for you. But before we get there to that part, to that juicy part, um, I'd love to ask too, like in your current experience, like in the now, what is something that is alive for you, that's coming up for you?
So many things. I know I'm in between, I'm in transition, I should say, stepping into a more authentic version of myself. I feel like I've, you know, gone through levels as I've gone through this journey of shedding
Mm,
layers that were not authentically me. And I know that I'm in transition, stepping into the new layer, or out of the
ooh.
old layer. And so that's what's really been present for me. It's
Mm-hmm.
that, and I still don't know what that's gonna look like, but it's exciting.
Yeah. Ooh, okay. Maybe we can circle back to this transition at the end, right? And like talk about what does it feel like to be in an in between. And so then maybe like thinking back and looking back over the years, what feels like a good starting point or something that stands out as maybe quote unquote the beginning of healing or awakening for you?
I think of from just to kind of give a timeline. So when I started in like at the age of 18, 19, I feel like from that point all the way to 2017, I was in a stage of trying to understand what healing meant. And in 2017 was is what I look back to and consider the beginning of my awakening. So it's when I feel like very rapidly I was and it's not something I chose to do, it's something that just kind of happened for me very rapidly, like a tornado came by and just like took me and in that tornado, in all the chaos that it brought for me, it it helped me finally understand what I had been doing the years prior. And so that's the beginning of my awakening, 2017. So that's
Mm,
a good starting point.
okay. When
Yeah.
you say like kind of like trying to understand what healing meant, is there like is there a way to expand on that, or is it too layered to like kind of point or get kind of dive into?
Let me try. I think I can. Um, so when I started in therapy from it was in 2001 all the way
Mm,
through 2017, I went through different therapists and different therapy modalities. Um, at one point in 2010, I did EMDR therapy. And
mhm,
I remember that was the first time when I felt like I'm finally getting something out of therapy, right? It wasn't just me talking to someone and sharing about how I felt and talking about events that had taken place, but it was
mhm.
more me actually doing something that felt like it was moving things for me, right?
Yeah,
So yeah, so but still not understanding or not being able to grasp what that was going to do for me, after the fact. And
got it.
so yeah, so that was a point in time where a lot of things came up. You talked about, the in between when we're in between layers. I think of 2010 as a year where it was very marked of me being in the that in between space, because through my work with EMDR therapy, a lot of my somatic um,
Mm,
stuff came up. I ended
mhm,
up in medical treatment without being able to figure out a diagnosis. And now that I look back to that, just to not put all the details out there, but when I look back
mhm.
to that, I realized that my nervous system, for the first time, was like saying, "All right, here you go. Right, this is all the things that you've been
Um,
holding on to, and deal with them now." And so it was a very uncomfortable in between space to be in. Yeah,
mm.
yeah.
You know what it's making me think, and you can let me know if you feel this resonates or not. I think that as first gens, we are, I don't know if resilient is the word, but we're really good sometimes at compartmentalizing
Mm,
and kind of separating. And what I've noticed sometimes, like let's say in one-to-ones for me, someone will be talking to me and I do a light energy work, right? So like I feel energy. And so someone will be talking to me and I can sense that they feel like they're opening up to me, right? But what I feel energetically is a huge wall and
uh,
they don't see it. I think it's so interesting because sometimes I'll be like, I can see you're pushing me away. And they're like, no, like I'm, telling you everything. And so I don't know, when you were talking, I imagine like potentially, right? Like there was a part of you that was like doing the hard thing, showing up to therapy, sharing the stories, but potentially from a like mind, like saying, recalling, expressing, but you
Yeah,
were suppressing or pushing down anything else, kind of like compartmentalizing, right? Do you feel like that? Yeah, that aligns with the experience?
absolutely, 100%. I remember showing up to therapy, as you're putting it that way. I remember showing up to therapy and being worried about, am I being too much for the therapist? Can the therapist
Mm,
handle it? Right? Worrying about
yeah, yeah,
showing up to take care of the therapist. And so,
yeah.
still not being able to grasp or understand that I was really supposed to just show up for myself, and
Mm-hmm.
as person, being used to taking care of others and always, putting myself last. That's exactly what I was repeating in that context. So yeah, absolutely. And
Mm-hmm.
finally, when I started doing I shifted into a different modality, which was EMDR therapy, working with the nervous system where the mind can't, dictate, right? My nervous system is like, all right, you just gave us a green light, right? So here you go. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, like you couldn't suppress that because it wasn't like for those of you that haven't heard of EMDR, I actually have an episode on like what is EMDR with a Latina therapist. So you guys can go check that out, but essentially like it's not targeting or it's not talk therapy, right? So like you're not recalling the events as I there may be some of that prior to, I think, as prep or for like the therapist to understand what you're navigating, but essentially
Yeah.
EMDR then is more somatic. So it kind of like deals with your senses, with your nervous system. And so, yeah, it may be like for you, it was shocking that, wait, no, I can't, no, like you can't intervene there, like it's targeting something different. Okay. So that was in 2010. And then we kind of jumped to 2017, you said, where it's like you felt like a tornado came in. So tell us a little bit more about that moment.
So one of the things I want to, because it's going to be helpful for the 2017, in 2010, because of all the things that came to the surface, I ended up finding myself in a situation where I needed to figure out how to navigate through the things that the doctor couldn't explain. And that
Mm,
somehow, I don't recall how I came across this, but somehow led me to um, trying out body scan meditation. And I had already been meditating since 2008 because of a
okay.
professor. I was already in graduate school. Um, and a professor had introduced meditation and the benefits and why if we were going to be therapists, why we should, meditate. So I had already been practicing
Mm,
meditation, but
mm-hmm,
I had never done body scan meditation. And that was the first time that I discovered that there was so much power in being able to connect with my body, right? That my body was not the boss of me, right? My body was not
mm,
there to bully me. My body was there to guide me. My body was there to basically to share its wisdom, to share all that it had been holding on
mm,
to in order to guide me into my healing. And so, but I had to discover that very, very slowly through body scan meditation, which then led me to, become really just convinced that I needed to go and get trained in working with the body and working with the nervous system. And I ended up, that led me to getting trained in EMDR so that I could offer that for others. Um, and then fast forward to 2017, because of that experience and the work that I had done, in 2017, I found myself um, very stuck. I had gone through a period of, um, I'm going to call it a period of a lot of loss,
okay.
without having lost a family member. So there was just a lot of loss because of situations that were happening in the family. And as the oldest
Mm-hmm,
daughter, I was at the forefront of everything. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that left me super burnt out, left me super disconnected once again from myself because I felt like I needed and like I had no choice. And so that caused me to kind of spiral into a depression that I couldn't even identify for myself. It took my husband pointing it out to me for
Mm-hmm.
me to for it to click and for me to understand I was in a really bad state of depression because I was just moving through life, showing up to the office. I feel like I was doing great work with my couples that I was working with. Things were moving along, people were getting results. So me as and there goes the part of compartmentalizing, right? Me as a therapist, I was,
Mm-hmm.
but me as a person, I was not okay. I was very disconnected from myself, and so that led to me going back to EMDR because the last time it had worked, right? It had gotten me
Mm-hmm.
to myself. And I went back, but this time it didn't work. This time
Mm-hmm.
something else was necessary. And my therapist and I, we were just baffled because no es esto, it's not that, it's not that. And so we kept trying to identify targets and nothing was helping. And a friend that I had at the time, a colleague that I had at the time, I shared with her, and she was the person that kind of planted the idea of like, what if this is more spiritual? And
Mm-hmm.
that's when just the world opened up. And that's why I call it my spiritual awakening, because that's when I started seeking answers, seeking different experiences to try and get to the bottom of what was happening. So that's what led me to my
Wow.
first Reiki session. It led me to schedule an appointment with a medium. It led me to, which I never thought that I would do something like that. It led me to my two sessions with past life regression. It led me to getting trained in Reiki, to then becoming trained in pranic healing, and so on.
Wow.
So it
Yeah.
was a massive event for me. Yeah.
Ooh. Okay. One thing that like I want to ask you before we move forward and talk more about this phase, when you said like as the eldest I was at the forefront of everything that was happening. Looking back, do you think others kind of placed you in that role and said like, "Hey, we need you to step up"? Do you feel like it was just yourself and your natural instinct to step up?
That, looking back to that time in my life, it was all of it. It was all of the above. It was, of course, myself, and at some point it became clear that I very naturally just had assumed the role, had assumed the responsibility of being at the forefront, um, unconsciously in the beginning. Um, and I
Mm,
think that was highlighted for me when I realized that my parents were leaning on me, that my parents were expecting me, not just expecting me
mhm,
to be at the forefront, but really leaving me no choice, but to be at
mm,
the front because of the circumstances. I think it was a very difficult situation for everyone involved. It was affecting everyone's mental health. It was affecting, my parents a great deal. I was the person in the family with the highest level of education, with I was the person in the family with the most um, internal resources at the time. Um, Internal resources with the most knowledge that was going to be instrumental in helping us as a family to get through the situation. And so everyone was looking to me because everyone knew that. And so, yeah, so it was circumstance, family, and myself. Yeah.
yeah, okay. Wow. Man, I like think of our younger selves and it's just like I want to give them so much love because like to think that sometimes we're the most resourced and yet like también we also lack a lot of resources, you know? We also like there's so much como carencias, I guess, like, and they're not the same ones as our parents experience, but like maybe communication skills, right? Like maybe like not knowing how to, for you, let's say, to know that, oh, I need to ask for help too. Like they're asking me for help. Maybe I don't know how to ask for it, or maybe this could be communicated in a different way. Like we don't always have those resources that like are built maybe throughout time and as we grow up. Pero um, yeah. Anyways, thank you for sharing that. I think that's one thing that I wanted to ask because I know as a fellow eldest, like a lot of eldest also listen to the podcast, and I think naming that, right? Like what puts you at the forefront of everything? Is it yourself? Is it internal? Is it external? Is it a combination? Is there something you can do about it? Is worth just like pointing out. But
Yeah.
then the other thing that stood out is like you mentioning kind of like a parallel in you said kind of earlier on there was something medical happening, but they couldn't give you a diagnosis. So you had to open different doors, right? To seek that the support. When you started to do that, do you feel like it was coming from a place of hope, of desperation? Like if you were to describe a little bit like the version of you that was exploring these things, how was she kind of moving through the world?
Well, the version of me that was exploring these things was more a sense of desperation, more a sense of, I know that if I'm not okay, all the people that typically rely on me are not going to be okay at some,
Mm,
right? So that eldest daughter sense of responsibility for everyone else. Um, so it's so sad for me to say that because I think I've never thought about this, and it's like even when I was looking to take care of myself and to figure out what I needed in order to be okay, I wasn't doing it for myself, right? I was doing it for everyone else. Yeah, 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 yeah. Mhm. Yeah, so there was a little bit of internal, turmoil around it because I had grown up until a certain age. I was Catholic, and then at some point in my, from like the age of 11 to the age of like 16, 17, I was part of Seventh Day Adventist church,
mm-hmm.
and that I was a, quote unquote church girl, so
Okay.
very, very conservative in my beliefs, very like, easy to like be espantada over anything that was not within the Bible, and so
Mm.
so to think that I went from that to like, oh, now I'm going to see a medium and las cosas del diablo, like all these thoughts. Esta señora es una bruja, and it's like all these things, right? That came up for me internally, but also I remember, when I shared with my mom, and this was before this, there had been an experience where I shared with my mom about a training that I had done, that is very much like EMDR, but it's not as well known, and it's also not something we often hear about, but it's also very like neuroscience based. It's called
Okay.
Healing from the Bottom Up. And I shared with my mom about how during that training, the thing I had worked on led me to ask my mom, hey, when I was in your stomach, did you experience, this and this and this? Because I got images, right?
Mm, mhm.
Mamá, her response was, ¿qué brujerías andas haciendo? So then it was like, oh my gosh, and it was her telling my dad to tell me to stop doing those brujerias, not understanding this is a training that I went to that has to do with like the nervous system, right? And this
Yeah.
came up, and just because it's so spot on to what you experience, it doesn't mean that it's a brujeria thing, right? It's like
Yeah.
minor registered what you experienced, mom, but my dad just kind of brushed it off and like made fun of it and said, oh, like we have a bruja in the family. But
Mm,
from that experience, and then all of a sudden having Reiki, having the session with the medium, and so many things coming up from that were validating or helping me understand. It was like, oh
mhm,
my gosh, how am I going to share with my family, with my
mm,
grew up being very, again, as the oldest daughter, always communicating with my parents, letting them know what I'm up to, because they need to know, and they need to let me know what they need from me, right?
yeah,
And so just I realized later in life that I don't need to tell them everything. Even though I was a married
yeah.
woman, not living in her parents' home, I was telling my parents everything. And when I started telling them, oh yeah, fui a una sesión de Reiki, fui con una señora que that talks to dead people, and so my remember like the shock in their face, and them worried and them saying, en qué cosas te estás metiendo? Like you have to be careful, right? But then also it led me to, I remember getting like almost like a kick out of seeing that shock, because I
Mm,
remember that I was thinking it's doing something for them. It's like expanding them somehow, right? And if
okay.
I'm going through this, what feels, because at that point I had already found the label of like, this feels like a spiritual awakening. I remember, if I'm
Mhm.
awakening, todos se van a venir conmigo because I'm not going to leave you guys behind. So it was
Okay.
more.
Very eldest of you, eldest daughter of you, yeah.
This is the eldest daughter version of going through a spiritual awakening. We want to take
Yeah.
everybody with us, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then no era más el regaño que, o sea, like maybe they were shocked, but no era como a negative experience every time you told them enough for you to
No,
want to
it
continue?
was it was just concern, them voicing concern, but there was worry around like, ten cuidado, fíjate con quién estás yendo. Also, no le digas a la gente porque quién sabe qué van a pensar, right? You
Okay.
don't know what
Yeah.
they're gonna think
Yeah.
about you. And my parents, specifically my dad, worried about, you're a professional. You have a reputation to
Your
take care of.
reputation.
You have an image that you need to take care of, right? And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
anyway, yeah, that's what I
Okay.
experienced. Yeah.
Okay, I asked that question because when I started to go to therapy, same. I was like, let me tell my family, like, this is or when I started to meditate, right? Like, this is gonna help them for a really long time. It was not well received. It was like, tú y tus loqueras, y tus cosas. When I really was like, no, but this is gonna help us. Like, it's gonna, if I heal, I want you to heal. So I definitely resonate with wanting to bring them along on the journey.
Yeah, I think their own exposure prior to experiencing us bringing this kind of stuff into the picture is really important. As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about how I think what helped for my parents was my dad grew up with un tío who was a very well-known curandero in
Mm,
Mexico, and
okay.
so my dad grew up with that experience. So to him, it was more like it would bring him back to some of the things that he had witnessed or heard about
Mm.
or seen, right? And for my mom started sharing what she knew about my great grandmother who was uh, who was also a curandera in Chihuahua, you know. And so
Oh, okay.
for me it was also the beginning of remembering, of being able to reconnect with roots that I didn't even know were there, you know.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
yeah,
Wow. Yeah.
that helped.
You start
Yeah.
you started to unearth maybe like their memories and the connections and the ancestral wisdom essentially. Um, what's like one type of session that stands out to you? I mean, you kind of mentioned each one brought you a little bit of like it's like puzzle pieces, right? We start to put together a puzzle for ourselves. So like which one is one that like is glowing that you're like, "Oh yeah, I want to talk about that one."
Oof. So fast forward to 2023, because at this point I had also tried breath work. And 2023, I go to a retreat in Austin, Texas, with Linda Garcia from Let There Be Loose podcast. She did a retreat called Warrior Cella. We watched Bad Bunny in Coachella, um, in the middle of nowhere. Um, but there was a lot of the activities that we did, it was around like spirituality and manifesting and, you know, basically like tapping into our own power. Right. And I
Okay.
remember not really having expectations because I had experienced breath work prior, not really having
Mhm.
expectations around what I was going to get to experience in the breath work, but then finding myself in the midst of this breathwork session where it's all women. I don't remember how many of us there were, but 20 some women. We're all
Okay.
laying out on the grass, and we had they set up this thing for us to lay out on. And we're like close to each other. And I remember at some point holding hands with the women that were next to me, right? And a bunch of us
Mm.
ended up holding hands through the breath work. And just the powerful experience of like finding myself feeling as if I was going back into my mother's womb, then going into my grandmother's womb, then going into my great grandmother's womb.
Wow.
And
Okay.
even just talking about it, I get chills because it was the first experience, I think it was the loudest experience of me
Mhm.
being aware that there was some kind of like intergenerational, some kind of ancestral healing taking place, right?
Mm.
It
Mhm.
was the first time that I went in just really open to whatever was going to happen and trusting, and then having that experience and just being so blown away by being able to receive what I received and later confirming by talking with my mom and then my tias about that, what I got about my great grandmother. So
Okay.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
So you guys were you're laying down, you're doing breath work, holding hands, and so I imagine with your eyes closed, was it like a full body sensation? Was it more memory? Like how did it feel?
So it was almost like an out of body experience. So I remember there was like some of the women I could hear que estaban gritando. They were screaming. And I remember in me, I was sending them love. I was like, I send
Mm,
you love, I send you love, I send you love. Because I could hear in some of the crying and some of the screaming, I could hear the pain, the deep, deep pain
mm,
that was being released. And at one point, I heard someone. So it was like the third or fourth woman that I heard. And again, I send you love, I send you love. I'm saying that, and all of a sudden I realize that Linda she's over me and she's doing something to my chest and she's guiding my breathing. And that's when I
mm.
realized the person that was screaming and crying was me. That's why I say it was like an out of body experience.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so right when I realized that, it's when I saw, like it was like it was both the experience, like the physical experience, but also like the observation. So like seeing it happen, right? Of like
Mm-hmm.
I'm like a little fetus, I'm in my mother's womb, and it all happened very quickly. And then it's like my mom in her mother's womb, my grandmother in her mother's womb, and then all of a sudden feeling all of the emotions of my great grandmother and getting
Wow.
like all these like images all at once of like what was causing all of those emotions for her. And
Wow.
that was just, that's when I don't know, I wouldn't be able to tell you if like I cried even louder or if I said anything. I don't know what happened, but next thing I know, I'm being held, right, by these two women that are next to me. And they're holding my hands and I can just feel the love coming through. It makes me emotional to remember it.
Oh.
I can just feel the love that came through and how held I felt. And so,
Mm.
we end this retreat. The day that it ends, we go to a book signing event that Linda had just released her book. So we go to a book signing event to support Linda. And at this
Oh.
book signing event, I run into the person who had me on her podcast like 2 years or 3 years prior. Um, I run into her at the event, and she's the one that invites me to Colombia to go sit with Yahe, with Ayahuasca.
Mm. Okay.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh. Whew. I need a second. I think as you were talking, my heart felt like it was like, no sé, como que it was being pulled, and I'm not sure why, but I had to
Mhm.
take a deep breath, like to like pull it back in. But oh my gosh, that sounds like such a powerful experience. And when you said like, you could feel that them sending you love, do you feel like that was the first time you felt that level of love? Because I've done mushrooms, and I feel
Yeah.
like it's something I had never felt before. So I'm wondering if when you were doing breathwork and receiving love, was it like, whoa, this is unconditional love?
I want to say that it is very similar because I think of the first time that I had an experience that was probably as powerful or almost. It can be compared, but it was also an out of
Mm-hmm.
body experience, and I can tell you that I was in this like absolute state of bliss that I didn't want to come back into my body. Um,
Mm.
I I remember just feeling like being in that state of love. So, you know, if I think of that, if I think about sitting with Los Niños Santos, um, I think Los Niños Santos, it's just a maybe different, but it's very similar.
Okay.
The Yeah, because with Los Niños
Okay.
Santos, you're feeling it through through what you're receiving, right? Through the medicine. Um, it may it may it may be probably a little bit more amplified, I would say.
Mm, got it. Okay. All right. So yes, okay. First, I was like, I was gonna ask you if she wrote a book, so then I know exactly who you're talking about. Okay. So
Yeah.
she wrote a book. You went to go support her, or I mean, I'm sorry, she had like a signing. You went to go support her, and then you rekindled or maybe saw someone you knew. Um, was plant medicine something that you were already feeling called towards? Was this kind of like the first time
No,
you had considered it?
yeah,
Okay.
no. I had known about ayahuasca 10 years since 10 years prior. So for the past 10 years before that, I knew about it, and every time that it came up through whoever was talking about it, I felt like I had this wall. It was like, nope, that's drugs. That's not for me. I'm never gonna do that.
Okay. Mhm.
Again, I grew up being that, good girl that,
Yeah.
no voy a hacer nada, no voy a hacer nada that goes, against my body. And so like to
Yeah.
the point where if you ask me, did you ever smoke, pot in high school? No. I never smoked pot. When did you start drinking? I had my first shot of tequila at 30, right? So like that's how
Wow.
that's how strict I was with myself. And
Yeah.
so to think that I was going to ever do plant medicine because I used to think of it as drugs, that was like
Mhm.
a no, there was a big wall.
Yeah.
So when I remember when the conversation started, um, I ended up recognizing this person. I went up to her to say hello, and we ended up my friend Jenny Viveros, Latin Burlesque. I don't know if you know of her,
I
but
follow her, yeah. Mhm.
yeah, so that's who I was with. And
Okay.
so we ended up getting invited to join this group of women for dinner, and we ended up hanging out with them, and it got to, let's talk about spirituality. And my grandmother had just passed, and I remember I shared about having lost my grandmother, and then the Rita is her name, starts talking about
Mhm.
ayahuasca. She had just gotten back from Brazil and starts talking about how she's now going to go to Colombia. And Jenny says to her, don't they call ayahuasca the grandmother? So that moment, it
Mm.
was like,
Mhm.
what? Like it's something grabbed me, because
Yeah.
again, it was I had just had that experience with the breath work with that grandmother, right?
Mhm.
So it was, my grandmother was very present for me. Um, and so I was like, okay, what is this? Like, why am I all of a sudden interested in like it's not typically my response to this kind of conversation. I even recall like going down the same path that I normally would whenever that kind of topic would come up, which I could feel
Mhm.
myself kind of like putting up the wall and like just like not gonna listen to this. I'm not interested,
Yeah.
right? And all of a sudden, like I was stopped midway, and all of a sudden I'm like really captivated by the topic, and then I start asking questions, and I checked in with myself, and even though I felt nervous about the idea, I wasn't scared like I was all the other times, right? So I ended that night
Mhm.
telling Rita, I said, hey, do you think you can get me in touch with the person that's in charge of this retreat? And this was in April. The retreat was for June. And I said, I can't believe
Okay.
I'm about to say this, but I think I might be joining you. And so it, I was like, I don't know how I'm going to make this work. I just took time off, from seeing my clients, and and here I am like thinking that I'm going to go to Colombia, and am I going to be okay after that? Like, am I going to be able to work after that? Like, all these.
Yeah.
There was a part of me as the days went on that was just so just sure that this is something that I needed to do, right? And I
Okay.
did. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. First, I just wanted to say thank you for naming what happens sometimes as we start getting called towards this, like the deprogramming que tiene que pasar for us to say yes, right? Because we are, in some sense, navigating this country with our parents, because we are quote unquote leaders from the beginning, there's a level of responsibility that comes with that. And like whenever we take risks, I think like we don't just assume the risk for ourselves. So we carry and put a lot of weight on that. And I think like unlike maybe other people who don't have that, when they get curious about things, they don't have to like do that double take, right? That we do, you know? And so I think like for example, when I thought about doing mushrooms for the first time, I was like, y si quedo loca, y si soy diferente. And like I'm not gonna go ask my parents, what do y'all think about this? You know? So it's such a weird new experience to be willing to take a risk, feeling the call, but also knowing like this doesn't align with what I would typically do, with who I typically am, you know? And so I would love to know maybe the integration piece because you experiencing like your grandmother's womb, your mother's womb, and your own I see these experiences as like something so grand and so different than what we experience here in the 3D, let's say, that it takes time to integrate. Like it's one thing to experience it and make meaning of it in the moment, but I think it's
Yeah,
another to then like bring it with you every day and see like how do I want to let this change me? What beliefs do I want to let be touched by this or you know transformed by this?
I can tell you that it's been a journey of, like you said, just questioning all these questions that have come up, and being able to tap back into that experience, knowing that how real that experience was for me, and that I don't,
Mhm.
and also understanding that I don't need the 3D world that I exist in to validate that for me, right?
Yeah.
Being comfortable with that, being comfortable with, if I share this experience, not everybody's going to understand it. Not everybody's going to look
Mhm.
at me como que no estoy loca, right? Not
Mhm.
everybody's
Mhm.
going to think that I'm not doing brujerias, or not everybody, and the reason why I'm open to sharing is I'm open to sharing because I think that if there's another me, another person like I was
Mhm.
back then, when I kept looking for, is anybody else experiencing this? And feeling like so lost because nobody was talking about it, right? Nobody was,
Mhm.
at least that I knew of, nobody was going on a podcast talking about their experiences, and that necessarily going and serving people that like me were going through this, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I talk to people now that maybe had a similar, they're awakening at around a similar time, and looking at the way things are right now and how we can come on a podcast and talk about it. And back then we didn't have all of this.
It's
Yeah.
crazy to me how long it's a transformation process and integration process to now be able to like yeah come on a podcast or speak on it like and I know you know you mentioned like your experiences were in 2023. So, but the thing is like the transformation didn't happen then. It took you know it's taken all of these things and you even like you not getting the help or the help that you were receiving not fully helping so needing to open these doors so then
Mhm.
experiencing different things and then you know so it's crazy how it works. It's crazy also the timing of it that so many of us started this process so long ago to be ready for it now when maybe some are just maybe the new tornadoes are happening for people and
Yeah.
now hopefully we're creating that landing space for them. So take us to Colombia or maybe like give us a glimpse of what happened there as we wrap up this part because we're also recording part 2 so I want to be mindful of your time.
So, in a nutshell, I go to Colombia, and there was a lot of work that was done around. And when I say that was done, I'm talking about not just in ceremony, but leading up to the
Mhm.
ceremony. In Colombia, in the
Mhm.
retreats, we always do circles. They call them circles of the word, but also during the circles of the word, we do other activities that are pretty much, it's like family. Ay, ¿cómo se llama?
Oh, family constellations or
Yes, sorry, yes.
okay. Mhm.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
we do family constellation work. And
Mm, mhm.
that, let me just say, that is so
Wow.
powerful. That is, I think, my
Mm.
next thing that I'm gonna probably pursue getting trained in. Um,
Mm, okay.
just because it's so powerful, and it has made such a big difference in the way that, I understand things and my work. But what I will say is that through that experience, it gave definition to what was later to come in ceremony. And I walked away understanding that, even though I went there thinking, oh, I'm going to just continue more of the healing around my mother wound and blah, 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 right? All the stuff I had been dealing with, all the years prior, it was unexpectedly the beginning of me working on my masculine, on my father wound that I
Mm,
didn't even know I had, because I grew up being so
mhm,
close with my dad, and I grew up, being a
mm,
daddy's girl, and I grew up, just like with my dad on a pedestal. So I had no idea what I was signing up for.
wow.
And walking away, just having received all of this new material to work on, it was like overwhelming. The first 6 months after, coming back, it was just a constant, you know, on a daily basis, just working through and shedding layers and layers of like how much of the programming of the good girl had come from that,
Mm,
right? Because of my dad,
mhm,
because I wanted to please my dad. I wanted his approval because my dad told me something that in his mind was to protect me and to help me and out of love. But to me, it was internalized, or for me, it was internalized as I need to repress and I need to mask and I need to basically not be myself, right? And
mm,
so
mhm,
understanding the that sometimes what comes from love gets internalized in a very unhealthy way, right? That was a
mm,
whole nother
mhm.
experience. And that's actually
Wow.
what made me continue going. And I've been going, I went back, I went to Brazil November. So 5 months later, I went to Brazil. Um,
Mm,
I felt the need. I couldn't wait for December to come around to go back to Colombia. So I just went to Brazil, right? Before I went to Brazil, I went and I sat with Los Niños Santos. And that was the
okay,
first time
wow.
that I saw, my father inside of my grandmother's womb. So I've been in both my grandmother's wombs. Both of my great
Wow.
grandmothers, both of my great grandmothers have come up in all of the work, and and then just from there, then I went back to Colombia the next month. This year, I went to Brazil again for the second time. Yeah,
Wow, okay. So you're kind of like really walking the path with this medicine, it sounds like.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
maybe to wrap up, what does this approach to healing, to awakening do that maybe prior like approaches didn't bring you, or what layer does it add? I don't want to say like one or the other, right? Or this is bad or good or better or not. What layer does it add that for you makes you keep coming back?
So there is a common saying that when you go sit in ceremony, one ceremony can be the equivalent of 10 years of therapy. And
Mm,
that's not an exaggeration.
mhm,
So for me, it's the amount of healing that I feel, but more than healing, because I also feel like I'm for the first time transitioning from I'm in a healing journey to I am in a journey of understanding and remembrance, right? It's the healing is no longer the focal point, right? Because
mm,
I'm now in a different stage um, of the process where I now understand that nothing was wrong with me to begin with, right? That nothing is wrong with us to begin with. That
yeah.
everything about us has always been perfect. Everything about, the things that we've had to experience, even the difficult, painful things, those things, you know, were meant to help us expand. And
Mm,
it doesn't justify, and I know that it can be triggering for some people to hear
yeah.
that. And it does, and at one point it used to be very triggering for me to hear that. But where I'm at, because of that work, it's no longer a trigger. It's more of a very deep understanding about what that means when I hear that being said by someone
Okay.
else. Yeah,
Mm, mhm. Oof. Yeah, thank you for naming that too. I think like everyone is at different points of their experience, and it's valid to not see it that way. It's valid to see it that way.
yeah,
And it does seem like, experiences like those are so powerful. I don't know if you see it that way too, but I think it's because it's beyond logic, right? And so like we were saying and how we started off the conversation, a lot of the times like we can compartmentalize, and I think like I personally have not experienced ayahuasca, just Niño Santos. But even that experience, I think like it is somatic in its nature. It's kind of like all evolving. It's spiritual, it's physical, and I think like that's what really makes it so deep, and so it's yeah, and powerful, right? So like you said, almost 10 years worth is the equivalent of, I can't even imagine how much it unpacks and how much yeah, it gives you to work with. um, and I also wanted to name, so we're going to be doing a part two. And you brought in the masculine energy, right? The father wound that you didn't know about. So this part two, you guys, just to tease you, like it's not going to be like focused on the father wound, but I think it's going to be focused on that first gen experience and how it does make us lean towards masculine energy in our lives. And so if you guys are tuning in and listening and you resonate with that, please look forward to part two, which is what we're going to be recording next. So, Maritza, thank you so, so, so much for sharing your experience. I want to make sure that I give you some time to talk about what you do, how you serve people, where people can find you, and hear more about your story and about your services. So, yeah, please share that with us.
so as I shared in the beginning, I'm a therapist, and I'm here to serve people that are, you know, looking to understand, but also to improve their relationships by being open to doing the work on themselves. Right? I work with couples, I work with individuals, um, and I work with couples individually. So
Okay.
I take on couples that want to work with me, and they each meet with me one on one. That's
Mm,
something that not all therapists are open to doing, but I really have seen the
mhm,
value in being able to offer that. Um, and then I also offer, healing circles. Sometimes I offer, events through partnering up with community organizations. Sometimes I offer those
mm,
healing circles, for people that reach out to me privately. We do breath work, we do, drumming, um, all kinds of like really energy, spiritual type stuff. And a lot of it does
mm.
become very somatic in the experience. I am getting ready to launch a podcast. If people want to find me on social media, on Instagram, I am at, the handle is the underscore sacred underscore within.
Mhm.
And my website is mindfulquestrelationshipcounseling.com.
I like to say, you have an audience of first gens listening to you. So if you were to leave them off with an ending mensajito, what would be something kind of like you can speak directly to them, that you would want to leave them with today?
Don't let fear stop you. Don't let fear of judgment stop you. If you feel called to do something, acknowledge the fear and go towards it.
Okay, pues you guys, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Let me know what question you would have asked Maritza that I maybe missed, that you're like, dang it, you should have asked her that. Leave it in the comments, DM us, let us know. And if you found this episode helpful or you think someone that you know might, please make sure that you share it with your amigas, amigos, amigues. And remember, first gen, that I love you, I love me, and I can't wait for you to love yourself. Bye.